Hello again. Welcome back to the Parenting Unmasked podcast. I'm Kimberly Cox. I'll be your host. I'm so excited we get to jump right into this today. So, last week we talked a little bit about what this podcast is going to be about. So, obviously, if you're watching, you probably have a neurodivergent child. So, today we're going to talk about the basics of things, okay? So, if you're past this point, um, maybe, you want to skip this episode or maybe still listen because I think we can all use that reminder of accepting what is. So today we're going to talk about what I call radical acceptance. And I know that that's it's a hot button topic, but it's also like a term that people get like crazy about, right? Because some people are like, well, you shouldn't radically accept things. You should always be pushing against like what is acceptable. But I feel like that's kind of what radical acceptance is. It's accepting that even though something is supposed to be a certain way, this is not, and that is okay. And I think deep down inside, when we take those deep breaths and we figure out just how crazy life is, how special life is, how everything that happens to us is kind of set up on a course, right? It's not that we don't have a choice, we do. And that's kind of the whole point of this whole thing. We have a choice how we react to this. We have a choice in what goes on in our life, in our family's life. So, we're going to talk today about radical acceptance of your neurodivergent child and possibly radical acceptance of yourself, as we'll get into in a little bit. So, we want to start out by talking about they are who they are, okay? And I'm going to make my 2 points, I think, kind of at the same time. They are who they are, and they were born perfect, exactly how they were supposed to be born. And this is a controversial topic. I know there's people that are going to say there's no way my child was born. Like, there are people who just, they are so, I don't want to use the word blinded, but I guess that's kind of what it is. They are so into the system, so into the way that things are, that they can't see outside the box into what things could be if they were not that. And so that's where I need to take your guys' attention to for a minute, okay? Now, there have been countless, people who are neurodivergent who have struggled as kids, but with the right therapy and the right help and the right support system and allowing the child to develop the way they need to chase those things that light them up. Because when we try to push them back into a box that they don't fit into anyway, we're making it harder. And then we add on top of that, pushing them into that box that they're not excited about, it just starts to become more work, no payoff. And I see this all the time, and people get mad at me because in some ways, I treat my kids like mini adults. And it is controversial to a point, yes, but it's just true. And it's difficult, but at the end of the day, treating my kids this way helps them to get ready for this part of life, okay? So we don't show up at a job, work for 2 weeks, and we're supposed to get paid every week, and for 2 weeks we never get paid. We would quit. We would go to the labor board. We would fight it. We would do something to receive some type of payment for the work that we've done. And I think all too often when it comes to our kiddos, they work a lot harder to be normal. They work a lot harder to fit into that box, to sit in those classrooms, to do the sports and the social activities and whatever that the other kids are doing. And a lot of times they're not getting a payout for it. The parents are getting a payout because they feel like they're getting a normal child. But the kids do not like it. They cannot stand it. They are frustrated. They're mad. And that is eventually what causes the issues later on in life. When we try to force our kids into things that they do not like to be forced into, and that's not saying that they shouldn't clean their room or that they shouldn't, do stuff, but there needs to be a payout for it, okay? And I know there's a lot of people saying you shouldn't ever pay your kids for helping around the house and you shouldn't ever do that. And while I get that and I understand where people are coming from with that, I want to remind you that that is a neurotypical operating system's way of doing things, okay? So a neurotypical will have problems with later on thinking that everything gets, they have to get paid to do their dishes at home or they have to whatever. Someone who is neurodivergent probably just won't do it regardless. And that's where we have to get them on board, get them interested in it, give them some kind of a reward for it, and then get their values underneath it so that they have some ownership and some, this is why I'm doing this. When they understand why they're doing something and they're doing it from the place of, I'm doing this because I'm, I want this value-based thing. I want safety. I want security. I want organization. I want peace. I want, when we come from that place. But that is something that we typically don't necessarily do with children on a neurotypical scale. We just say, I'm the parent. You're supposed to do this. Now go do it. And if they don't do it, we say, well, we're going to take stuff away. We're going to make your life, miserable until you listen and do what we say you need to do. And so this is another place, and I'll say this throughout because I say it for everybody. I feel like accommodation, while it definitely benefits neurodivergent people for sure, I feel like there's a lot of neurotypicals that could benefit from it in a way, and we just choose not to put the work in to do it. I know that's probably going to step on some toes. I'm sorry, but that's just the truth. We choose not to do the work, okay? Not to figure out what the values are, not to figure out how to frame it, it's just easier to be like, oh, you need to clean your room. Why? Because I said so. And boom, done. And put your foot down. And I know you're tired. I know you're stressed out. I know you've got a lot going on. Your kids are too. Your kids are too. Okay? And before people start coming at me with my kids, all they do is sit in school all day and learn. Children are sitting in school and learning at a much younger age than they were originally, than is originally developmentally appropriate for them to. Okay, and when we're sitting our kids in school in preschool and they're having to sit for story time and they're having to sit and color and sit and trace letters and sit and do all of this stuff, it's just taking more time away and training them, okay? It's training them to be able to sit in school. It's training them to be able to sit in school. Is there anything wrong with that? That's a back and forth, right? Because school helps them learn things. School helps them, with learning. It helps them with socialization. It helps them with being able to handle the real world, right? So that is important. However, I am a firm believer that we have taken play out, we have taken fun out, we have taken learning-based play out of things and turned it into sit down, do this worksheet, sit down, color these things, sit down, trace this thing. Because we have too many kids in a classroom, we have too much going on, we have too few teachers to help out, and so therefore we have to have some semblance of control or nobody's going to learn anything. So then we have to start kind of pulling in and going, okay, we're going to have this, we're going to do this craft and we're going to do this. And it's all developmentally appropriate things. However, there's such a, when I went to kindergarten was half day, and that was kindergarten. And in kindergarten, we did stations. And, for maybe 20 minutes, we were sitting on the carpet. And while we were doing that, we were, answering questions, and it was kind of back and forth. We were getting involved in stuff. And then, you know, the other, 2 hours or so of the day were spent going from this station to that station, and we were moving and we were doing things. And I look at kids in kindergarten now, and they're sitting in desks and sitting in rows, and they're there all day long. It is become a very, we have taken the kids' childhood away more and more. And that is one of those places where I feel like, you're either going to agree with me or you're going to disagree with me on that. But there's good and bad in anything, really. And in this case, there is good and bad in a public school system or a, traditional school system. We'll put it that way. Because, there's a lot of private schools, charter schools that do the same thing because they have to. They don't have a choice. They don't have a choice because they have too few helpers. They're doing too much, whatever. So I always try to get my kids on board with things through values. And sometimes that's difficult. And sometimes I end up spending a lot more time doing things on my own first while I'm thinking about that and trying to figure that out. And some people would tell me, isn't that just kind of like copping out and not doing what you're supposed to be doing as a parent? And I'm thinking to myself, well, if you didn't know how to teach your kid how to do a math problem, wouldn't you learn yourself rather than teaching them the wrong way? And then 1, making them frustrated about it, 2, making them hate the idea of learning, and 3, making it harder for them to unlearn the first way and relearn the way that's right. So this is one of those things. It's a personal preference of mine, but I would rather hold out a little bit, spend some time thinking about it, really try to figure out how to get them on board with things, and then get them on board. And then when I get them on board, it's much easier to do the things that we need to do because now they're already committed. They have some type of ownership, some type of stock in this. And so I think a lot of times what we do is children who are, and I don't like to use the word higher functioning. I don't like the functioning words. And even the needs kind of is a back and forth on that. It really is. Because I feel like every neurodivergent person has different needs according to their particular brand, flavor, however you want to word it, of neurodivergence. However, there are kids who it comes easier to and kids that have a harder time with it. And we just have to figure out. And yes, it takes work, okay? It takes work. But I'm here to tell you, this is part of this whole podcast episode. You are the parent to do it. You are the one who gets to have this job of leading the transformation. Yes, your child has to do the work, but you get to be the one that gets to encourage, that gets to supply the whatever the different ways of doing it are, that gets to continuously work on trial and error and figuring things out. You get to be the problem solver. You get to be the one who gets to get in there with your hands in that clay, helping to mold that, whatever that accommodation is that they need to get them to where they need to be. There are lots of different ways. There's lots of therapies. There's lots of different things that you can do. And that is ultimately a very individual-based decision. You have to make the best decision that you can make for your child with the information that you have in the moment. So, 1, knowledge is power, okay? And you cannot hold yourself accountable or hold it against yourself, I guess, would be a better way of putting it. for not knowing what you didn't know when you didn't know it. So that is my first thing right there. I say to any parent who has a neurodivergent child, look things up, look it up, learn, just soak up all that knowledge that you can. Learn about different kinds, different, comorbid conditions, things like that. Because once you have a wide spectrum of knowledge, then it's easier for you to just kind of sit back and like take the different pieces of the puzzle and put it together in a way that makes sense. Okay. I know can be incredibly daunting. Not only did you find out that your child has a condition, has a way of living that is is never going to fully change. This is the way that they are. Okay. They can improve. They can learn to be productive. But at its base level, this is the operating system that you're working with. And so you need, one, to learn an entirely separate operating system when you're working with your kids. The first thing I would tell you to do in radical acceptance is to sit back and go through one of those questionnaires that you did when you were getting your child diagnosed and really think about your childhood and be honest. Be ridiculously honest with yourself. Did you struggle with any of that stuff? Because if you did, then it might be easier for you if you go through the proper channel, if you will. Because if you yourself can identify in any way as neurodivergent, you're going to understand the disconnects between how difficult it is to live in a world that is one way, and yet you cannot completely understand or go with that. Your brain fights against that often. And so when we can take that deep breath and go, okay, these are the things where, I can kind of say, okay, I might identify in these ways with my child. I want you to think back to how you were parented. I want you to think back to some of the things that were done, some of the things that were said, because oftentimes we we almost disconnect from our childhood when we are non-diagnosed neurodivergent, okay? Because we either hold it against ourselves and call it our fault and we're this and we're that because that's what we've been told, or we just kind of try to push it over here and go, it doesn't exist, and do whatever we can to push and fight through to make things better. So with that being said, look back. What were some of the things? Because as you start to think back on your childhood, if there were places where you felt unheard, you felt unseen, you felt like you were, wrong or different or had to work harder or had to be more or less or whatever, we want to be very open with those areas, okay? That doesn't mean go to the complete opposite end, as most of us do. Most of us just try to keep our kids from ever having to feel the issues and the problems that we had to feel. And some of that stuff is good and is supposed to, right? Your child should never feel trauma. Your child should never feel, especially from you or from, family members. If those people in their life are doing that, then, that's a question of, do these people who are treating your child this way have a right to be in the child's life? Or do we need to kind of pull the child away from these people and say, when you can learn to not make the child feel horrible about themselves, and then you can have a place in their life. And until then, I think you need to not. And again, it's a very slippery back and forth slope of things too, because we can go too far down one way or too far down the other way. So really, it's about balance, but balance is an illusion at the same time, which makes it maddening for us sometimes, because sometimes we're like, oh, well, which way is balance and how do I do this? And that is where I tell you, when you get your child on board with things, you can still do the things that you want to do. You can still have the life. They can still have chores. They can still do schoolwork. They can still do all that stuff. But you're doing it from a place of, there's a reason why we're doing this, okay? I don't know how many times I have heard parents of unschoolers, okay? So homeschool, but not using necessarily a lot of curriculum or things like that, just letting the kids decide kind of what they're gonna, learn. And once they figure out that thing that they want to do, right? Whether that's, I want to be a fashion designer, I want to write novels or, plays, or I want to design sets, or I want whatever the thing is that they want, right? And a lot of times it's more in the creative area, but not always. Sometimes it is, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be these things. Then you can show them what it takes to have those things. And if that is something that they truly want, they may not always want to do the work, right? That may be something that they may not always want to do. But in the end, they will put in the work because this is something that they want bad enough. They will chase down that road. So when we get our kids on board, that helps. When your kids are little and it feels like it's incredibly hard and you have no idea what you're doing and you're frustrated and aggravated and everything is crazy, I want you to take a breath, okay? I want you to realize you have a calling. You are exactly who you need to be for your child, okay? There's tons of research. I could spit out a bunch of it, but that's part of the thing. That is part of your journey. Your journey is to dig down deep, to learn, to explore, to just figure out things, right? Because once we figure out what's going on, and that can be reading books, it can be watching videos, it can be talking to therapists, it can be talking to a speech therapist or an occupational therapist. There are tons of places to get this knowledge, okay? But once you get that idea, like I will give you a couple of hints here. Like if you have a child with a speech delay, a lot of their problems are going to be based on not being able to communicate what they want to communicate to you. So, maybe they can't talk, right? But they can still listen, they can still learn, they can still understand, and they still have ideas and needs and thoughts in their head. They just can't get them out. So that is where it is important, very, very important for you to slow it down, to start to learn your child, right? As soon as we start to learn our kids, we learn kind of what their needs are. We get them maybe on a schedule more so that, it may not be a perfect schedule, but maybe it's they wake up and they eat and then 3 hours later they have a snack and that we were kind of keeping their needs met so that at least they're getting those and they're not frustrated because I'm hungry and I'm tired and I'm bored and I'm, all these things and I'm frustrated that I can't tell you that. So there's that part. Once you can get through that, there are therapies, there are ways, we call it scaffolding, okay? And there are lots of ways to scaffold, which is to kind of bring the task to where the child is, okay? Whether that's, we have like a visual schedules where if a kid can't read yet, you have a picture of what is going to happen and then, a picture of the next thing that's going to happen so that they have it in mind what's going to happen. They're in the know. And if they don't remember, they can look and they can see it and they're in control of that knowledge. They know where to look. They know what the different things mean. And then they're able to kind of know how their day is going to go. It takes some of the scary, some of the uncertain, some of the I am not in control, everybody else is. And that's frustrating for anybody. Adults get frustrated when they're out of control. Kids get frustrated when they're out of control too. And yes, we have to keep the boundaries up and keep them safe. We have to keep the ultimate control. However, allowing them to make choices, allowing them to have some form of control can be huge. It can make a huge difference. And once they start to see that, okay, I'm going to get some choices, I have some kind of, ownership of this, I have some kind of decision making power over all of this, they're going to maybe come at it a little bit differently. And that attitude adjustment is going to give you an attitude adjustment. And you're going to, it's going to make everything better. Okay. So you are exactly who you need to be. And I know a lot of parents don't want to hear that at first because it's scary and it's frustrating and you're grieving. Okay. And you have every right to grieve. You have every right to grieve the life you thought you'd have. You have every right to grieve the things you feel like you're going to miss out on. You have every right to grieve that things are not going to look the same. People are not going to treat you the same. Things are not going to be the same as you planned on them being. Take the time, grieve, please grieve. And you're going to grieve in cycles, okay? It's not like you're going to grieve and it's going to be over and you're just going to shove it over there and be done with it. It's going to come back up. You're going to get triggered. Things are going to happen. But once we get to a place where we can kind of get into this acceptance, right? This acceptance of things, it opens so many doors, okay? Let me tell you. It opens doors, it opens opportunities, it opens ideas, it opens a relationship because you're no longer trying to push your child into what you feel like or other people feel like they need to be. They feel accepted by you. They're going to trust you more. They're going to feel like they can count on you more because you've shown that acceptance to them, that unconditional acceptance, that we don't necessarily know what's going on in their brain. And even when they're able to talk, a lot of times that's part of the neurodivergent condition, is being unable to clearly communicate things. And so maybe they try to communicate how they're feeling, or they try to communicate what they think about the situation, but it's very difficult for them to. And then there's a frustration back and forth with everybody, and it becomes this kind of behavior, if you will, because they don't know how to communicate that. There are adults. I happen to be someone who I'm learning to communicate better, but it's taking a lot of time. And it's taking time because I've never learned to communicate appropriately. So I have always bottled stuff up. And then when I do communicate it, it comes out in a fireworks display of not niceness. And therefore, I kind of try to keep wraps on it a lot of times so that we don't escalate to that point. But even as an adult who is still working through this stuff, I have to come to places where I have to learn to communicate. I have to say things. I have to tell people how I feel sometimes. And, as I'm learning, it helps me to teach my kids. And those are all things, if you think back, sometimes you can think back and go, man, maybe it is the emotional component of it that's the hardest part. And maybe it's like, man, I knew how to behave properly when I needed to and stuff. But man, were there times when I would just blow up on people, or, I would just throw away something that was really good because it just didn't seem the way I wanted it to be. It wasn't perfect, or I got criticism on it. And so instead of being open to the criticism and allowing myself to learn from it, I allowed the emotions to override me, and then I just blew up and threw it away and was done with it. I feel like as adults, when we can look back on some of those things, or maybe it was, sensory situations, right? Maybe you were super sensitive to loud noises or bright lights or certain textures or smells. And you can think back and go, oh my goodness, here I am telling my kid, well, mom cooked this. I'm not cooking you something else. Here, eat it. And I, as a child, would have went crazy over that and not been able to do it. And I would have had issues. And sometimes we just don't put two and two together right away. And then once we do, it's like that light bulb goes off. And I want to tell you, this is where I said, you cannot blame yourself for what you didn't know when you didn't know it, okay? You cannot sit there and get down on yourself because you were doing something that unknowingly was causing distress to your child. If they can't communicate it properly and you can't read their mind and you haven't put the two and two together yet, you're just left kind of trying to figure out what it is, right? And so once you know, though, okay, once you have that knowledge, then it's time to take action on it. And that doesn't necessarily always mean, oh, I'm only going to give my kid what they want to eat, or I'm only going to, dress my kid in one particular outfit bought in 6 different colors or something. Sometimes we do make, you know, like a choice to buy several of one kind of shirt or one kind of socks or something like that because it makes sense. It makes our lives easier if we know that every pair that they're going to pick out is going to be the right pair, right? It makes sense to know that they're not going to have a shirt in their closet that they're going to see that they're going to want that is going to cause them a meltdown because just because they like the character on it, they don't like the way it feels. And then that's frustrating because I want to wear that character today, but I don't want to feel this way. So, especially when you're little and you don't know how to properly work through that situation, that can be hard. So, sometimes we do those things where we just kind of buy the things and fill in the things that work. And sometimes we do things like, I'm going to give you a couple of foods that I know you do like, and then I'm going to put the regular food on your plate too. And you're going to take at least one bite and try it, and then you can have these foods. I'm not going to starve you, but I'm also not going to sit and make an entirely different meal altogether for you. You know, when I was working through this with young kids, I used to make spaghetti and I would it was kind of deconstructed spaghetti. So I'd make spaghetti noodles and then I'd have spaghetti sauce in the side. And I'm not a big spaghetti fan itself. So I would take the noodles and I'd put butter and Parmesan cheese on it, maybe some garlic salt, and eat them that way. My oldest didn't like the noodles. So I would take the sauce and I would put it on a piece of bread for her with a piece of cheese, cut it in half, make it into like a sloppy Joe kind of ordeal. And then the girl's dad and my youngest would eat spaghetti the way that everybody eats spaghetti, right? The normal way. But that was one way that I could kind of mix match things so nobody felt like they weren't getting something. Everybody kind of felt like they were winning in a way. Because for a long time, we just didn't have spaghetti because I wasn't going to make spaghetti and then my child not eat it and then feel bad that my child wasn't eating when I knew that there was problems with it. So then I kind of thought about it and I worked outside the box and was like, okay, well, I can do this and I can do that. And everybody's happy and everybody's fed. And I only made one meal. I only cooked noodles and sauce. So that is one area where when we can mix and match things, it helps. That's a way that we can scaffold, right? We can kind of put this thing where it's like, okay, you're going to get success. And you're going to get success the way everybody sees success. You're going to sit down and you're going to eat with the family. And it's not going to be its own separate meal. It's going to be part of what everybody else is eating, you know? So finally, my last point for this episode is to find your support system, okay? I know it's difficult. I know it's hard. I know that even if you expect it, okay, I had been going for 2 or 3 years to specialists and doctors saying, look, I know it's not classic autism, but it's autism. Like, I can pull this part and this part and this part and this part and this part, and they don't make sense with anything else. These are all autistic tendencies by themselves. Nothing else fits that. And they just could not, a lot of these doctors and specialists could not look past what classic autism was. And it was so frustrating for me. And so when I finally got the diagnosis, I just couldn't emotionally handle it for a minute. But it was a combination. It was a combination of relief that, okay, one, I'm not crazy. Two, I saw the signs and I started implementing things and I started doing things when people were telling me that this wasn't what it was. And I was like, well, it doesn't hurt to put accommodations in place if it's going to help, regardless of whether it's this or whether it's something else. If this is a way that works, why would we throw that away? So I was already putting some of the supports and some of the things in place that I was then later able to have more supports for that. Then there was the just like sideswipe of like, this is real. So now that fairy tale that you kind of still held on to a little bit way in the back of your mind of, oh, we could just get through this and everything's just going to be fine and everything's going to be normal and everybody's going to love you and be proud of you because you fixed your child. Out the window. Done. It was gone. And I had to take a step back and I had to think to myself, like, do I need to fix my child? Is my child broken? Or is my child different? And different is scary to most people, but also good. Because when people have different thoughts and different opinions, different, perspectives on things, we can have conversations that open us up to new possibilities, new ideas, new everything, right? Where it wasn't there before. So that was a place where I had to just like really accept. And then once I accepted it and I was really there, I had to go find the people who were on my side, the people who said, look, we see you. We know that you're doing the best that you can. We know that you're trying hard. We know that you're working. You're trying to do the best you can for your kids. And that's not always easy. It's not always easy for neurotypicals in a neurotypical world, right? But when it comes to neurodivergent families in a neurotypical world, I can figure out how to accommodate myself. I can figure out how to accommodate my child. I can advocate for the accommodations and explain why it's important. And then further, kind of emphasize the importance of doing. And then when they start to see, the results that they want, then everybody's happy and we're all good. However, at the end of the day, it still takes extra work, extra effort. It takes more energy, more brain power, more thoughts, more consistency, more putting in the work. And that can be exhausting. And then other people think, well, how in the world you're only doing this? Like, you're not doing anything that other people aren't doing. So why are you so frustrated? Why are you so tired? And it's like, you have to find your support system of people who understand. Because I can sit here and talk to someone who's neurotypical all day long. And I can even say the things, like I said last week, about, being in a, like being given a open book test, but not given the book, and I can't give you my book because I need my book. So you just got to figure it out yourself. And how unfair that seems and how hard that must be. But on the other hand, people can say, I understand, and that sucks, and that sounds horrible. But they don't fully understand, which I think most of us are grateful that they don't understand because, you know, nobody wants to have to do more work. Nobody wants to have to work harder. Nobody wants to have to live inside a brain that is not, you know, designed for what everybody, is supposed to want out of life, right? So I guess I will close on this note. When you find your people, when you find your amazing, awesome people who will go to bat for you, who care about you, who can stand up and be there for you, who, when you're having a really bad day, you can call them, you can message them, and they're going to tell you, you're doing awesome. I know you don't feel like you are, but you are, I promise. You're doing all of this for your kid, and your kid loves you for it, even when they can't verbally tell you they love you, even when all they can do is bounce off the walls, or they can talk, but only about whatever their interest is. When you find your people, okay, that is when you can start to relax a little bit. You can start to build that community and make those your friends. Make those the people that you go to with things, right? And you kind of keep your little neurodivergent family and friends over here. And then you can go visit the real world. You can go visit your parents or visit, with family and friends that don't understand. But we don't take our stuff to them because they're not going to get it. And they're going to tell you stuff that's going to discourage you. You keep your encouragement and your questions and your, venting to this group over here that does understand. And then you can flourish. And when you flourish, your family's going to flourish. And once that happens, then the outsiders are going to start to see and they're going to say, whoa, what just happened? Like, this is not what we thought was going to happen. They're not doing it according to the book. They're doing it in their own way, but they're still successful. Things are still happening. They're still doing all these things. I don't understand. And then when they start to ask you questions, and they still might not be ready for the answers, but you're getting much closer to being able to have the conversations with them that are going to bring them on board too and help them to see that everybody is different, right? Everybody's brain is actually different. Those who were born, those who became wired differently in this different operating system, they're not bad. They're not less. They're just different. They require a little different programming, a little different upkeep and maintenance to keep them going. And at the end of the day, once all that is done, they're going to be equal too. They're going to be equal too. So I hope that this resonated with you guys. I hope that you got something out of this. If you did, drop it in the comments. Make sure you're liking, make sure you're subscribing and sharing this out to people. I'm Kimberly Cox. This is the Parenting Unmasked podcast. I'm so grateful that you are here. We will see you next week with a brand new episode. Have a wonderful week. Talk to you later.